celebrating Mass and administering sacraments, arguably helping his campaign.
On m'enlève le droit de dire la nouvelle messe, on m'enlève le droit de dire les sacrements nouveaux et la nouvelle doctrine, mais c'est précisément ce que je ne peux pas faire.
Sancte Romane Ecclesiae Cardinalem Wojtyła.
Born in Catholic Poland, newcomer Pope John Paul II was the first non-Italian pope since the 15th century. He was installed into a growingly de-Christianised world and a church that was profoundly divided. It was time to regain control, and it would start with absolute respect and obedience to Rome. Archbishop Lefebvre and his dissenting fraternity would become the first to pay the price after they seriously crossed the line in June 1988.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonsoir. Ite missa est, la messe est dite et la rupture consommée entre le Vatican et Monseigneur Lefebvre. Monseigneur Lefebvre qui aura été excommunié quelques minutes à peine après la consécration des 4 évêques, des mains même du prélat des Cônes. Plusieurs milliers de fidèles s'étaient réunis dans ce petit village du sud de la Suisse pour chanter avec ferveur une liturgie supprimée par le Vatican depuis 20 ans tout juste.
John Paul II's second task was the fight against communism. He believed the West had been too indulgent. He had experienced the repressive methods of communism in his own country. He believed liberation theology was spreading communist propaganda, and he started his battle in Latin America. Cardinal Ratzinger, his right-hand man for 26 years, confirmed this.
Es geht uns nicht darum, den Einsatz der Kirche für die Armut, für die Armen und gegen die Unterdrückung zu bremsen. Im Gegenteil, wir ermutigen sie. Wir wollen lediglich Formen, die nicht helfen, sondern zu neuen Totalitarismen führen, als solche aufdecken. Wir wollen zeigen, dass es Optionen gibt, in denen Politik und Glaube, Politik marxistischer Herkunft, so ineinander verquickt sind, dass am Ende die Freiheit Schaden leidet und keine wirkliche Befreiung zustande kommt.
In 1983, Pope John Paul II visited Nicaragua. Waiting at the airport was Father Ernesto Cardenal, who'd recently become a minister of the revolutionary Sandinista government. He'd resisted the Pope's order to resign and was publicly criticised and rebuked by the Pope. That evening, during the Pope's Mass, the angry crowd refused to listen to him.
Silencio. Unos minutos de silencio. Unos minutos de silencio.
Mesmo colocando o concílio como um Pentecostes, como um momento privilegiado da igreja, a política, a pastoral, era de substituir o concílio por outra coisa. Em 85, no sínodo dos bispos reunidos pelo Papa João Paulo II. E depois, a política de controle dos seminários, de tudo que os meninos liam, do acesso à discussão, foi retirada a teologia da libertação. E os superiores, os bispos, os prelados, foram pouco a pouco sendo totalmente mudados.
In 1985, John Paul II appointed a bishop opposed to liberation theology when he approved a successor to Brazil's Archbishop Camara, who'd worked to free the poor. And he did so with each new appointment in Latin America. many of these new bishops belonged to Opus Dei.
Opus Dei é uma igreja ligada ao poder econômico e tradicional, e conservadora, e anti-liberação, sobretudo dos pobres.
John Paul II beatified the founder of Opus Dei, José Maria Escrivá, in 1982, just 7 years after his death. He then canonised him in 2002. Former Opus Dei members have accused the group of being secretive, authoritarian, dogmatic, elitist, and overly preoccupied with wealth and power within the church and society. Opus Dei was born in Spain under the protection of Franco's fascist regime. A statue of its founder, José Maria Escrivá, now a saint, currently reigns over St. Peter's Basilica. Pope John Paul II knew that the viability of the Church and its sacramental life rested on its priests. Yet new recruits were scarce, and many of those who had joined were influenced by progressive ideas, not entirely favoured by the Pope. One man who could provide 2,000 traditionally trained priests, completely obedient and totally devoted to the Vatican, would provoke one of the Catholic Church's biggest scandals. His name was Maciel. He was a Mexican priest, and the movement he created is called the Legion of Christ. Supported by the papacy and the dictatorships of Franco in Spain and Pinochet in Chile, the Legion of Christ was financed by rich Mexicans worried about the rise of a dissenting clergy. In 1956, serious concerns were raised when members of the Mexican clergy sent a letter to the Vatican accusing the Legion of Christ founder, Maciel, of sexually abusing minors and using drugs. An investigation began, but was cut short by the death of Pope Pius XII in 1957. And for the next 40 years, any new accusation against Father Maciel was considered slanderous. Pope John Paul II refused to believe the serious charges against Father Maciel. They continued to reach Rome, but they were archived without any further action. In January 1990, to celebrate the Legion's 50th anniversary, John Paul II personally ordained 60 priests from the group in St. Peter's Basilica. In 2002, ex-legionnaire Patricio Cerda produced a 400-page file, accounts gathered from former legionnaires. This was given to Cardinal Ratzinger, but nothing happened. Towards the end of his reign, John Paul II welcomed Father Maciel to Rome several times. Cardinal Ratzinger was concerned by the impact of these public demonstrations of friendship in St. Peter's Square, and in 2004, he launched an official investigation. In response, the leaders of the Legion of Christ quickly announced that Father Maciel would be retiring from his position. There were calls for the institution to be immediately closed down. But in July 2010, Pope Benedict appointed a new leader for the Legion, a papal delegate to whom he granted full power to reform the institution. The new leader was Cardinal Velasio de Paulus, the former Vatican finance minister.
Víctor Manuel Mata Valencia.
Presente.
Óscar Manuel Macías Pérez.
Presente.
On the 12th of December 2011, 49 legionnaires were ordained as priests in Rome by Cardinal de Paulus.
Presente. Presente.
Saved by Pope Benedict and now rid of its disgraced founder, the Legion of Christ was up and running again and serving the Vatican. But for Benedict XVI, the real battle lay elsewhere. The traditionalist camp, though rather small, continued to make progress. Pope Benedict was willing to reintegrate them within the Catholic community, even though these dissidents completely rejected Vatican II. This caused some to question whether Benedict XVI ever truly accepted the reforms of the Second Vatican Council that reinterpreted centuries of Catholic tradition. Among these dissidents, Archbishop Lefebvre's fraternity remained the most powerful. It had continued to thrive even outside the church. It included 550 seminary students and 470 priests in 30 countries, as well as 150,000 official followers. The Pope reached out to them in a spectacular way.
Oggi è stata pubblicata la revoca della scomunica nei confronti dei vescovi che appartengono alla fraternità sacerdotale San Pio X, cioè il movimento chiamato lefevriano dei tradizionalisti che non avevano accettato il Concilio Vaticano II e altre determinazioni della Chiesa. Con questa revoca il Papa Benedetto XVI sana una frattura, o perlomeno fa un grande passo per superare una divisione profonda che c'era da molto tempo nella Chiesa, di cui soffrivamo, e il Papa in particolare soffriva molto.
This proved to be a surprising decision, as just a few weeks earlier, one of the 4 reintegrated bishops made worldwide headlines for his declarations concerning the Holocaust.
I believe that the historical evidence is hugely against 6 million Jews having been deliberately gassed in gas chambers as a deliberate policy of Adolf Hitler.
But you say not one Jew was killed?
In gas chambers.
So there was no gas chambers?
I believe there were no gas chambers.
Die Aufhebung der Exkommunikation der 4, einschließlich des schrecklichen Williamson, ohne Grund, ohne jeden Grund. Sie haben nicht mit einem kleinen Zentimeter nachgegeben und irgendwo auch ihre Akzeptanz des Konzils ausgesprochen. Sie sind geblieben, wie sie sind und waren, und sind von der Exkommunikation befreit worden.
Despite this, Pope Benedict made further concessions. He granted Bishop Fellay, Archbishop Lefebvre's successor, the right to criticise the Second Vatican Council, along with extensive autonomy within the Church. In February 2012, Bishop Fellay declared, "I am convinced that 10 years from now, things will be different, because the Vatican II generation will no longer be here. The issues will disappear. But Benedict XVI's attempts to readmit the traditionalists met resistance from the reformers. In many parishes, the Vatican's pronouncements were no longer obeyed without question. In 2011, a group of priests from Austria, the heart of Catholic Europe, decided to be publicly disobedient.
Über 300 Pfarrer, Priester aus Österreich haben einen Aufruf gemacht, ungehorsam zu sein. Das heißt, die Kirchenordnung offen zu kritisieren und in verschiedenen Themen, zu verschiedenen Fragen der Kirche andere Wege zu gehen. 80% der Pfarrer in Österreich praktizieren Ungehorsam im Stillen, ruhig. Ja? Wir sagen, das ist nicht gut. Es muss ans Tageslicht, es muss offen zur Sprache gebracht werden.
Father Helmut Schuller initiated the appeal. He was the Vicar General of Vienna before being dismissed by his superior, Cardinal Archbishop Christoph Schönborn. Today he's a university chaplain and a parish priest. Catholics in Austria have a long history of dissenting. Back in 1987, parishioners refused to allow Opus Dei member and recently inaugurated Bishop of Vienna, Kurt Krenn, to enter their church. Ten years later, a group of lay Catholics set up an association called We Are Church. Their petition gathered 500,000 signatures in Austria and 1.8 million in Germany. But that didn't stop Pope Benedict from appointing a new bishop in Berlin, widely known to be close to Opus Dei.
Joseph Ratzinger's mission has failed. Absolutely hopeless, a pope that allows the Germans to abandon their faith.
In France, there had also been rising anger towards the church hierarchy. In 2009, Catholic women protested on the streets.
Quelle est la place des femmes dans l'Église aujourd'hui?
Elle est en bas de l'échelle, si on peut dire. Elle est dans des tâches d'exécution, elle est dans le pot de fleurs, dans les chasubles qu'on emmène au pressing, elle est dans une foule de petites tâches de ce genre, mais les femmes n'ont pas de visibilité au niveau de la décision, elles n'ont pas de responsabilité directe dans les prises de décision de ce qui se passe, nulle part.
The role of women within the Church had been discussed by the Second Vatican Council, but the question was quickly removed by Paul VI under pressure from the Curia. So the rebellious Austrian priests decided to take a stand.
Wir sprechen uns auf für die Zulassung von Frauen zum Priesteramt, weil für den christlichen Glauben Mann und Frau vollkommen gleich sind.
But from John Paul II to Benedict XVI, the Vatican has refused to budge on the matter. Christ and his apostles, they say, were men, and so were the bishops and priests who succeeded them. And it must remain this way.
Jeder Priester, der jung anfängt, ist voll Idealismus und ist voll der Meinung, das, was auf ihn zukommt, das wird er bewältigen. Und dann gibt es immer wieder Frustrationen, es gibt die Enttäuschungen, es gibt die Einsamkeit und dann immer wieder Versuche, die Einsamkeit mit irgendetwas auszufüllen. Und dann kommen die falschen Wege.
Many times throughout its long history, church officials have wandered onto the wrong path. The global paedophilia scandal has been an almost fatal blow to the image of the priest.
On a découvert qu'il y avait une raison d'Église, qui est comme la raison d'État, qui mérite le silence. Donc on a sacrifié des gens pour un système, pour une structure. Et ça, je trouve que c'est pour l'Église un péché particulièrement fort.
Pour moi, il fallait en parler, heureusement. On a un peu fait éclater un tabou.
I would like to pause to acknowledge the shame which you have all felt as a result of the sexual abuse of minors by some clergy and religious in this country. I am deeply sorry for the pain and suffering the victims have endured.
But the Pope's apologies do not seem enough. The revelations of abuse keep on coming from the United States, Ireland, Austria, Belgium, Germany and Australia, arguably building on the crises triggered by the confrontations surrounding the Second Vatican Council. It has become a question of the Church's very survival.
Tá vendo? Mais cego enxergando. Tem que acontecer de verdade, senão nem coloca no microfone.
In Brazil, as in many other countries, the Church, both fascinated and worried, observes the new Christian evangelical movements that draw huge crowds.
Levante as mãos agora, toda a multidão. Levante as mãos agora, a multidão. O nosso Deus toca nas suas mãos agora.
The Church attempts to boost its image by showing the world it can still gather its huge crowds too. In Madrid in 2011 on World Youth Day, a crowd of 1 million waited in the blazing sun for hours for a glimpse of the Pope. But when it comes to the discussions initiated by the Second Vatican Council 50 years ago, if anything, Pope Benedict has hardened up. The Church is not wrong, he suggests. The world is.
Ohne dass die Kirche in diese heutige Zeit hineingeht und sich den heutigen Fragen stellt, nicht überleben wird. Sie wird etwas fürs Museum werden, ein Museum, aber keine lebendige Kirche.
So what is the challenge facing Rome from the legacy of the Second Vatican Council? The trouble is, fewer of the laity care as they once did.
Il y a des gens pour qui la question religieuse n'a aucun intérêt et qui ne voient même pas pourquoi ils se poseraient cette question-là. Ça veut dire qu'ils soient contre, mais ça veut dire qu'ils sont ailleurs.
So the risk is that the Catholic Church withdraws into itself, incapable of further evolving, as Pope John XXIII had dared hope when he convened the Second Vatican Council 50 years ago.